Cynthia Ryland, Mr. Putter and Tabby Smell the Roses. Illustrated by Arthur Howard. Chapter 1. Together. Mr. Putter and his fine cat, Tabby, lived next door to Mrs. Teaberry and her good dog, Zeke. They all did many things together. Mr. Putter and Mrs. Teaberry took walks together, and read books together, and made tea together. Tabby and Zeke did everything Mr. Putter and Mrs. Teaberry did, except sometimes Zeke did it the hard way. Mr. Putter and Mrs. Teaberry also celebrated together. They celebrated Halloween and Christmas, and the first day of baseball season. They celebrated new tires, they celebrated good teeth, and of course, they celebrated birthdays. Chapter 2. Something Special. Mrs. Teaberry's birthday is on Saturday, Mr. Putter told Tabby one morning. I want to do something special for her. All morning, Mr. Putter thought of special things he could do for Miss Teaberry. He thought of ice cream, he thought of cake, he thought of balloons, but they had always celebrated with those things. Mr. Putter wanted to do something extra special this year. And besides, he said to Tabby, don't forget what Zeke does when balloons are in the room. Mr. Putter made a cup of cocoa and poured Tabby some cream. Then he sat in his chair to think. I've got it, said Mr. Putter at last. It had taken 3 cups of cocoa, but he had it. He would take Mrs. Teaberry to the conservatory. The conservatory had the most beautiful trees and plants and flowers in town, and Miss Teaberry loved beautiful trees and plants and flowers. She was always telling Mr. Putter about her maples and her roses. Mrs. Teaberry will love the conservatory, Mr. Putter told Tabby. Mrs. Teaberry's birthday would be good. It would be special. It will be heavenly, said Mr. Putter. Chapter 3. On Saturday, Mr. Putter put on his best shirt and his best tie. He also put some pomade on his hair. It made him look very spiffy. Pomade makes the man, Mr. Putter told Tabby. Mr. Putter and Tabby knocked on Mrs. Teaberry's door. Happy birthday, said Mr. Putter. Mrs. Teaberry was wearing her dress, with all the ruffles and her zebra earrings. You look very nice, said Mr. Putter. Zeke looked very nice, too. His jacket matched the earrings. Shall we go? Asked Mr. Putter. I can't wait, said Mrs. Teaberry. And off they went. Soon they arrived at the conservatory. It was very large. It had beautiful windows and beautiful things growing inside. It was heavenly. Mr. Putter sniffed the air. It smelled all wet and flowery. It reminded him of going outside in the rain when he was a boy. It smelled so green. Mr. Putter and Tabby and Mrs. Teaberry and Zeke walked among the trees and plants and flowers. They touched the leaves. They smelled the roses. They learned the facts. Mr. Putter told Zeke that if he was very, very good at the conservatory, he might get a surprise. Zeke lived for surprises, so he was very, very good. He was not chewing. He was not digging. He was being as good as can be. And he stayed that way for exactly 5 minutes. Then he found the banana tree. Chapter 4. Not so heavenly. Zeke thought the banana tree was for him. Zeke loved bananas. He thought the banana tree was his surprise. So he jumped up and grabbed a bunch, which made the guard blow his whistle, which made Tabby jump into a lemon tree. which made the lemons hit everybody on the head, which made the conservatory not so heavenly. Chapter 5. Surprise! Mr. Putter and Tabby and Mrs. Teaberry and Zeke had 2 bunches of bananas and 9 lemons and 9 lemons got into Mr. Putter's car. That was fun. That was fun, said Mrs. Teaberry. You had fun? Asked Mr. Putter. Of course, said Mrs. Teaberry. Didn't you? Didn't you? Mr. Putter looked at Mrs. Teaberry. She had a head full of leaves and a lap full of fruit. She was such a good sport. Mr. Putter wanted to keep giving her special things, so he drove her to their favorite ice cream parlor. They ate lots of strawberry cake and lots of strawberry ice cream. And Mr. Putter blew up 15 balloons. Mr. Putter looked at Zeke. Zeke looked at Mr. Putter. Then Zeke gave Mr. Putter a surprise. Zeke gave Mr. Putter a good Zeke. There were 15 balloons in the room, and Zeke was good. Mr. Putter was so happy that he sang the Happy Birthday song twice. It was one of the best celebrations ever. Everyone went home very happy. Mrs. Teaberry felt very special, and the next day there was even lemonade.